So you were a figure skating fan, is what you're trying to tell me.
I was a fan of her figure, yes.
Figure skating, finger painting, not necessarily in that order.
Anything having to do with fingering, really. I mean...
well, ultimately, unfortunately, it's going to leave everyone cold one way or the other, from my understanding. And the Russians will always give you a lower score.
Oh,
It is known. It is known.
Yes.
Points for effort, though.
So you had a question.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just curious about your all's thought about the recent shakeup there between CNN and Fox News there, with Tucker and Lemon both out.
Are they going to swap places?
Isn't it? Yeah, that's what
the
I
weirdest
heard.
wife swap in history.
Oh, man, that wife swap. Oh, I'd watch that.
That would be insanely fascinating. I just thought it was quite the news, though. I mean, Tucker Carlson, getting fired from Fox there, even though he had the highest rated cable news show. That was shocking, but not necessarily. I mean, because of his ratings, it was kind of shocking they would let him go. But given the near $1 billion lawsuit settlement they had to do, unsurprising. But then the same day, just hours later, Don Lemon also goes, and he's like the highest guy on CNN.
Well, you know what the thread is? Misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to hear men sit and bloviate to one another anymore, gentlemen. And if our ratings have proven nothing, it is that is a true statement.
You're not wrong. You are not wrong.
That is very fair. But I think Don Lemon would agree that we are all still in our prime.
Who the hell wants to listen to Don Lemon about anything at this point?
Yeah, that's fair.
Relieved of duties for a reason, I suppose. I will be completely transparent here. I don't watch programming at this point for the sake of my sanity.
Who does?
Two,
yeah, neither do I.
I have never heard Don Lemon speak. I have no idea what his stances or positions are. He is a name on a masthead to me at this point.
He became insanely popular during the Trump administration, rallying against Trump, right?
Oh, not hard.
But it was but that's why I think it was fascinating, though, just because you've got one voice on one side that hypercritical of Trump, and then the other one that was so pro-Trump, at least in public. The personal side that those private recordings show, obviously different.
Way different.
That Tucker was not necessarily insane. He just put in terms of his opinion, he knew that Trump was a blowhard and hated him, but on camera he was a shill for the money.
I feel like in the United States political system, we have been on that weird sort of roller coaster ride where you're in that independently spinning little metal globe. And depending upon how much you lean as you're going into a turn, you have a very dramatic backlash the other direction as you come around. I feel like our political system has been doing that for the past 23 years. Now, at some point, we're going to get sick of being motion sick and hopefully level out, because the extremes, I feel like, are just starting to drive all of us crazy. And I feel like those two individuals, whether or not an amicable agreement was reached where they just parted company, as it was said in the weirdest hostage video possible on both stations, or it's just don't look directly at the camera. We would like to thank him for his dedicated service, and so long, and thanks for all the fish, you bow-tied fuck. Yeah, it's just very bizarre. So hopefully this is a sign, a bellwether, if you will, that things are settling out, but I doubt it.
See, I tend to suspect it's going to go the other way, because Fox, although obviously a conservative network, is now being... they're being flanked from the other side by Newsmax already, right? So you already have a further right-wing network that is critical of Fox for being too liberal, right? So you've already got a network that's panning the other way. And if you've got Tucker Carlson now with his super high-rated show gone, I can only think of that's probably where he's going to go, right?
Well,
the more conservative network, which means that you'll probably get more people watching that network and amplify that, ridiculous voice even more.
But also, and because I had seen this on the discourse online, they're still, Newsmax and I think OAN are both still going through their defamation lawsuit against Dominion. So don't even know how much they are going to have to go, because Fox, they had to pay a lot of money. granted, should have been higher, and they should have also had to issue a public apology on air. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. Like, who knows if those two, which are way, like, less income, you know, they don't make as much money, anywhere near as much money as Fox does. Who knows if they'll be even able to stay afloat.
Well, that's why I think if I was their execs, I would probably be jumping at the chance to try to get Tucker on then, because you're going to get a ton of ratings as a result, which means you'll get a bunch of money in, which will help you settle those things. Would be my guess, anyways.
Yeah, but like Tucker Carlson, regardless of the kind of person he is, he's not stupid in terms of a business aspect. Like, he put on the character because it made him money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's going to be like, oh man, this ship is sinking. I'm being thrown from a sinking ship onto a smaller sinking ship as well. Like, I don't think he's going to try and fling himself on there.
What are his
Who
options?
knows?
He's not going to get hired on at MSNBC.
Any port to storm at this point.
I mean,
exactly.
retire,
Otherwise,
do a podcast. I don't know.
he can be the new host of Fucked and Friends, apparently, on Tuesdays, and it'll be a grand time for all involved parties.
He'll be a co-host with Joe Rogan or something. I don't know.
Oh.
There's just only so much disinformation you can subject the general public to while wearing a bow tie. And speaking as one of the 3 hosts of the Disinformed podcast, I can say I will never be wearing a bow tie on this show for that precise reason.
Bow ties are cool.
Fezzes are cool as well. From
Yeah,
my
you got the
understanding.
reference, my man.
When do I not? Fish fingers and custard. And speaking of something fishy by the eternal, behold, it is in fact the Disinformed podcast. I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
You guys are really going to have to give this shtick up at some point. Like, it's just beat it into the ground, why don't you?
Michael 2 times, if you will.
Ugh. I'm going away. I'm sorry. I'm going to break on through to the other side at this point, I think, and we'll be perfectly fine. I am the Lizard King. But for those of you who are here and not interested in the goings-on over at Fucked News, then I imagine you're going to get a different form of Fucked News this evening, because what we typically do on this show for the uninitiated is we like to dive into random esoterica, and in the course of explaining it to one another, we lie occasionally. It's part of the fun, particularly when our correspondent is typing in his inquiry to the fucking chat board, apparently. You know, as often as you mute yourself that you can't do it when you're doing a fucking research paper is just beyond me.
Well, what's humorous is I couldn't hear it on the headphones, so I didn't think you'd pick it up, and I didn't want to make the little click.
So you'd rather make
happens.
a lot of clicks.
I couldn't hear it on the headphones, so I thought you couldn't hear it.
So what, were you writing a missive about how, like, we should probably better hear it on the headphones? Like, what's happening?
I typed 8 characters. It couldn't have been that much.
If that was 8 characters, that was the most aggressive chicken pecking I have ever heard in my life. Dear God.
I have been told that I type quite hard. It's
very
true.
aggressive typing.
Ooh, type me harder, Daddy. I want to take that dictation.
Dictate me.
Oh, God. Okay, so at some point, I'm going to get back to introing this show. But so in any event, as we are explaining random nonsense, we lie about it. That is the shtick. That is fun. But the whole point of the show is there is a denouement at the end of the episode. We explain what we lied about and why, so that you do not leave disinformed. That is always the goal. It is not necessarily always achieved, but, you know, we try. Debbie 2 times over here. So, I know. Chloe Dancer, The Crown of Thorns. I'm there. It's just more fun for me to flail at the name like I'm Jim Cornette with a head cold. But what we are going to be doing today on the topic of, delicious delicacies that we were bringing up is I know we have a member of this crew that cooks very frequently for a very large scale for no good reason. There are 3 people living in that home, and you, Doc.
And one of them is 19 months now, as of today.
Oh, so she wasn't pounding the sausages like they were going out of style?
As surprisingly, no. Although she does love coleslaw.
Really? She's the one.
Yeah, and then she gets quite stinky after.
Not the one. Everybody gets stinky after coleslaw. It just can't be helped when you got that much mayo in play. But so I wanted to have a little discussion about something that I had alluded to previously. And since Michael indicated that he was abdicating the role of presenting this evening, you get to listen to me. So my sincerest apologies. What I will tell you off the start is that I have 7 lies for you this evening.
Oh, man.
Welcome back to Shane presenting
excited.
an episode. You shouldn't be. All of them are number lies.
Oh, no.
But for continuing listeners of this show, all 3 of you, I want to say that I would imagine my peculiar relationship with food and drink is not something you are woefully unfamiliar with. In point of fact, I would say probably anybody who's watching this recording at the present could also likely surmise I enjoy partaking in Epicurean pursuits from simple observation. I'm a little stout here. But perhaps there's something transcendent in tantalizing one's palate, which is a bit of a necessity for those who lack the refuge of other vices. I believe Michael has often heard me analyze what I refer to as the Mormon deadly sin of gluttony, as to individuals who are left very little to indulge in outside of chaste worship. Let's not discount that this faith, of course, expects people to maintain virginity into their 20s as a bedrock
Let me just
principle.
soak it in, baby. Let me just soak it in.
Soaking.
You don't have a lot of outlets for your anger or animosity generally, and thus food and drink are some of the very few sensory experiences the faith isn't in principle just outwardly repulsed by. Of course, there's the admonition about moderation in all things that is frequently quoted but very rarely upheld, unless you're just anorexic. Otherwise, balances. But what is often foregone when met with the argument of, what else am I allowed to do? Fornicate. It's like, okay, fine, eat the Snickers. So anyway, I digress. Moving on. This will bring us...
eat a Snickers.
I mean,
Horny?
that was...
Why wait?
About... I'm not myself when I'm horny. So... I have often said that as well. This is my Incredible Hulk principle. The second the hormones kick in, rational thought out the window. You just wake up, covered in weird substances with your pants ripped and wondering, how did I get here? But anyway, digressions aside, this will bring us around to the meat of the matter, quite literally, for this evening's episode. The death row tradition of offering a last meal to an individual heading to their demise.
Ooh.
Now, I, as per usual, don't intend to just be glib about maudlin topics, even though I am exceptional at it, and a noted fan of gallows humor. But I've always been fascinated by the concept of what a person would choose to have as their last meal. And in that wool-gathering expedition, I am not alone. The concept of the last meal offers an irresistible blend of food, death, and crime that piques a voyeuristic and fetishistic bend of the American consciousness. By way of an example, Studio Feast, an invitation-only supper club in New York City, hosts an annual event based on the best responses to the question, "You're about to die, what will your last meal be?"
Really?
Yes, indeed.
Huh.
Quite true, in fact.
Weird.
There are books, articles, and art projects aplenty addressing, amongst other things, what celebrity chefs like Mario Batali or Marcus Samuelsson would have for their last meals, or what the famous and the infamous consumed before taking their last breath. Newspapers reported that Saddam Hussein was offered but refused filet mignon, or filet mignon for those of you who are playing the home game in the grand United States. My apologies for my French pronunciation.
I didn't get it the first time. Okay.
Yes.
Why would you refuse that?
Chabless. Well, I mean, he was going to the grave, so who knows? Maybe he wanted to eat something else.
Is that true?
True?
That he did not, or that he did refuse the filet mignon.
Or that he was even offered it.
He was offered chicken and passed.
There we go.
So, And then it's very obvious why you would pass, I'm sure. I'm sure he'd eaten plenty of chicken. Who knows? But while Esquire published an article about the terminally ill François Mitterrand, the former French president, who had oysters, foie gras, and the pièce de résistance to ortolan songbirds. Now, the songbird is thought to represent the French soul, and because it is a protected species, is also illegal to consume. However,
is it a protected species?
Yes, it is a protected species and illegal to consume. And yet, apparently the terminally ill get a pass on taboo table fare, but who knows?
Huh.
Oh, that's what you got to do. If you're on death row there, you got to ask for the bald eagle.
I mean, it's like at this point, it's like, what else are you going to do to me, right? I might as well just hit all the sins on the way down. It's like the most aggressive bingo card ever. I got one row. Why not fill in the rest of them, right?
Exactly.
Do you think anybody has ever ordered something they're allergic to? Like, I've got a peanut allergy. Give me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just as a last, like, F you. You're not taking me. That's right. I'm going out on my own. I go out
on my terms. Yeah.
See,
yeah. Huh.
when the idea is that I'm either going to be put to sleep and then given a lethal injection, which I won't feel, or suffocate to death due to a foodborne allergen, I think I will take the lethal injection.
Counterpoint, because some people still use the chair, and I think at least one other state has tried bringing back a firing squad. I will double check on that as we talk.
Okay,
but
I would be interested to hear how many are still using antiquated modes of dispatch, but yeah. In those very heightened circumstances, again, would you rather be electrocuted to death or suffocate? Lady or the tiger?
Yeah, but as Michael said a minute ago, it's more not so much like the mode of death, because either way you're gone. It's more the going out on your own terms as opposed to the state taking you.
I don't think like my windpipe closing off would even ever be my own terms either. It's like,
but I mean, people hang themselves all the time, from the bunks and stuff.
Yeah, so. I'm not angling to do it personally, but given my druthers. Go ahead, Michael.
So, according to an article that I read in March of this year, 2023, Idaho recently passed a bill that would seek to add the state to a list of those authorizing firing squads, which currently includes Mississippi, Utah, Oklahoma, and South Carolina. So there are multiple states that have authorized the use of firing squads as a method of execution.
All progressive thinkers.
Very much so, yes.
And in many of those states, I would rather be shot than live there. So I'm not entirely shocked that that is the choice, but not to alienate our good friends from Oklahoma.
Ooh. Okay, so ignore the allergy bit there for the last meal, because to your point, maybe you don't want your windpipe to close off. But then as a last little middle finger to the people, would you then, let's say you're lactose intolerant, or would you want something that would really make a mess afterwards as you're on your way out, just so people have to clean it up? And so you might be gone, but you got a last little take that,
I've had people call me vindictive before, and I, as of right now, realize I'm not even in the running based on this line of questioning.
Oh, no, as I'm walking that green mile, I want the green vapor behind me and everybody having to wear their...
Like a slip and slide down the hall to get to where you're at. Okay.
That's right.
I'm walking the green mile, but you best believe I'm making a brown mile on the way.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, God.
End that conversation on a brown note. No, I don't think...
I'm sure somebody would have. I mean, if you were on death row, wouldn't you?
I mean, there are common tales from prisons where people are throwing their feces out the doors at guards as they're walking up and emptying bottles of urine. So yes, I'm sure this has been done a multitude of times.
Yeah.
I would not choose to do so, but again, I very likely have not done the crime to warrant the time. So, but
true.
That's presupposing that.
Did you say very likely?
Statute of limitations has been passed in several instances, but moving on. So while this can be said in spite of the fact there are firing squads apparently still functioning in the grand United States. The number of yearly executions in the U.S. has generally declined since a high of 98 in 1999. The web series Diners, Drive-Ins, and Death Row tracked and commented on last meal requests of death row inmates across the country during the first decade of the new millennium.
That is clearly not the name of the show.
It is not clearly.
So you're telling me that that's not a lie?
I mean, that is a very reasonable name for a show.
It is clearly the lie.
I mean, when the other title is Dead Man Eating, I thought...
And it's hosted by Guy Fieri.
I mean, that would be delightful. That's a haircut I would be willing to be killed to get away from. So
True. Get me out of here.
But the Diners, Drives, whatever it was.
Diners, Drive-Ins, and Death Row, I think, is a delightful title for a show. And I will hear otherwise.
Well, I think it's a great title. And like I said, Guy could change his name to Die. It works beautifully. I love it. I'm already envisioning this.
And then we can have Die's grocery games. You can buy all of the food that people have allergies to in the hopes of shitting yourself on the way to the chair. It'd be a grand time.
Food Network, we've got a pitch for you.
Oof. Clean up on aisle 7. But whatever your stance on capital punishment is, for those who enjoy catching stray bullets or hopefully being shocked into a slight slumber, eating and dying are, of course, universal foundations for richly symbolic human rituals. As we alluded to in last week's episode as well, death is a dark alleyway cloistered at the end of a well-lit lane. We often sit metaphysically straining to glimpse anything that we can see what lays beyond. Concurrently, if as the adage states, we are what we eat, then a final meal would seem to be the ultimate self-expression. So, give me peanut butter and death all at one time, apparently, seems to be popular in this conversation. But there's also an
Cake or death?
Cake or death? I'll have the chicken, please. There's also added intrigue when that expression comes from the deranged or the infamous. Individuals like one Timothy McVeigh, who, of course, I'm sure we're all very familiar with. Michael's nodding, so I'll take that as a definite. He apparently ordered 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his final meal.
Ooh, okay.
Or one Theodore Bundy, as I alluded to earlier, who apparently declined to make a request for his special meal and was subsequently served steak, eggs, hash browns, toast, milk, coffee, juice, butter, and jelly.
Is that a lie?
Not a lie. History has not told whether or not he used the jelly for its intended purpose, but I digress. So, when this combination of factors is, of course, set against America's already tempestuous relationship with food, it's a banquet that few will pass up the opportunity to partake from. So, let's get into this. The idea of a meal before an execution can be compassionate or perverse, depending upon your perspective, but it does contain an inherently curious paradox. Marking the end of a life with the material which sustains it seems at once laden with meaning and somewhat beside the point. As Barry Lee Fairchild, who was executed by the state of Arkansas in 1995, indicated, "It's just like putting gas in a car that don't have no motor."
Wise words.
Not wrong. Let's harken back to a bit of history here, and I'm sure this is what Michael is here for. I see his fingers and his pants steepling all together.
Is that quote a lie?
The quote is not a lie. That is exactly what Barry Lee Fairchild said.
I got goosebumps. Give me that history.
Easy. On January the 14th of 1772 in Frankfurt, Susanna Margarete Brandt prepared for her execution for the act of killing her infant daughter by sitting down to a sprawling feast with 6 local officials and judges. The ritual was known as the hangman's meal. On the menu that day were 3 pounds of fried sausages, 10 pounds of beef, 6 pounds of baked carp, 12 pounds of larded roast veal, soup, cabbage, bread, a deux strudel, and 8.5 measures of 1748 wine. So, with that said, had she committed the crime in neighboring Bavaria, perhaps, Brandt likely would have preceded the meal with a morning drink in her cell with the man who would later decapitate her with a sword.
What?
This shared aperitif was called St. Joan's Blessing after Joan of Arc, who was similarly offered a cup of wine as sacrament before being burnt as a heretic, which is a delightful irony when you get down to brass tacks. But yes, quite fun.
I almost said hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
That's true? That's like you have to share a meal with the person that's going to behead you?
Not a meal. You just have a little shot with the individual who's going to decapitate you.
Dang.
So
what would you toast to? Health?
It's certainly not.
Well, in all honesty, it's probably beneficial for the mental health of the executioner, I would think,
and a degree
right?
of civility, right? We'll get into some of the underpinnings that led into this as well, or deviated from it. But yes, that is true. You get to share a little snifter. But
how do you introduce yourself if you're the executioner? Hey, I'll be killing you today. Would you like a shot? Yeah. So you want me to swing really hard? Like where would you say is your weak point? Like what kind of conversation do you have? Yeah.
Well,
what side do you want not splattered against the wall?
This will get worse, so just brace for impact. But during the hangman's meal, the condemned would participate in a scripted exchange in which they were told to seek forgiveness for their actions. So there was supposed to be a significant amount of hand-wringing that accompanied this. The sharing of a meal between the condemned and those who had condemned them is symbolic, representing both forgiveness and acceptance. The aforementioned Brandt, however, reportedly sat stolidly, refusing to issue any apologies and willfully flaunting their tradition. Subsequently, she consumed nothing more than a glass of water during the meal.
Oh, lame.
And her companions in the evening's feast fared little better.
See, I think that would have been very successful in terms of, the forgiveness and the, hand-wringing for the first few. Before word got out that no minds were going to be changed, because obviously you're going to have the fake, acts of attrition, oh, I'm so, sorry, and in hopes that it'll, sway them, and
right? As opposed to it being forgone,
yeah. But once word is out that it doesn't matter how much hand wringing you do and how many tears you shed, you're still going. Then I suspect that. Why bother with it and be like, hell no, I'm proud I did it.
Well,
I'd do it again.
There's some afterlife underpinnings as well. I didn't include it here. And there's an article that I'm basing a large portion of this on that is included in the show notes. I'd recommend you checking out. A lot more extensive in talking about sort of the things that happened region to region that facilitated a lot of these sort of traditions. But one of the individuals that they alluded to had converted to Catholicism over the course of being on death row and simply wanted a Eucharist as the last meal. And so there are acts of contrition, and that person was genuinely very contrite, offered nothing but apologies, said, I know this is the condemnation was necessary. I'll make amends for these sins as I go into the next life, and so I will do everything that I can to kind of ease my passing. And so there's some aspect of that I'm sure is probably baked into the process here, because religion, of course, was a lot more entwined with state, particularly up until, just even the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So that person asked for it. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that the rest of the hangman meals are by request of the condemned?
That depends on circumstances, situations, and different places. So some of it is very likely determined by the state. For instance, like the hangman's meal seems like it was more a function of the state, and just they kind of brought in fare for everybody to be able to dine together, less than, indulging the individual who's, being put to death. But we'll see if we expand on that a little moving forward. But the origins of the last meal ritual, of course, aren't readily agreed upon by historians. There's very little in history that is routinely agreed upon, as we know. The earliest record of the death penalty is the Sumerian Code of Hammurabi in the 22nd century BC. Some scholars suggest the last meal may have begun in ancient Greece. And in Rome, gladiators were fed a sumptuous last meal, the coina libra, the night before their date in the Colosseum. In 18th century London, favored or better off prisoners were allowed a party with food and drink and outside guests on the night before they were hanged. The next day, as the prisoner traveled the 3 miles from Newgate Prison to the gallows at Tyburn Fair, the procession would then stop at a pub for the condemned's customary great bowl of ale to drink their pleasure as their last refreshment in life.
A bowl of ale.
A bowl of ale, indeed.
One big bowl of ale, please. So
I'm sorry if I went too fast there. I saw your eyebrows raised.
I was going to let you finish the thought.
I'm going to let you finish.
Exactly, but I think Hammurabi?
No, I did not say Hammurabi. It was Hamusamush.
I know. I was going to say, is that part true? Because the first I had heard of like a set of laws was Hammurabi. Hammurabi?
No, it is the Sumerian code that we were referring to here.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Understandable. And then I also don't think British people are that nice to their condemned.
So at the party, I was questioning that too.
They are most certainly, and I will give you a credit here because you didn't ask the right question, but you hit the right place. It's not the ham sandwich code, as I have dubbed it here. It was the Ur-Nammu, which was the Sumerian code, but it was still a Sumerian code that did predate that. So you were in the right spot. I'll be a little more generous this evening as opposed to my usual stances here. But I thought Hamu sandwich. After I saw Namu, I went like, oh, okay, we're going to have a little fun here. But yes, in point of fact, the good folks in London were very indulgent, but that leads me into the next statement, and this is England's noble or highborn criminals, such as like Anne Boleyn or the Earl of Essex, were of course beheaded elsewhere, often at the Tower of London. Walter Raleigh reportedly took a last smoke from his tobacco pipe before losing his head in Old Palace Yard at Westminster. So I imagine there was a social caste system in play here for how you were treated. So it wasn't every common criminal who was being marched to the gallows was given this treatment. I imagine it was if you had some degree of social standing, then you could be indulged for the sake of appearances, because we don't want people to feel as though they are lesser than when being taken to the gallows. Flashing forward to something a little more near and dear to Michael's heart, if our Christmas episodes have taught us anything, it is in the New World, the Aztecs would feast some of those who were tapped for ritual sacrifice, and as part of a pre-execution deification ceremony that could last up to a year. So I suppose it's their own version of death row, but it's like, hey, if you're going to go, at least you get to have a little fun going up to it, I suppose. Nice. It should be noted here that typically these were warriors captured on the battlefield, and in other cases, after they were killed, their captor was given much of the body for use in tlatkoli, or a special stew of corn and human flesh that was served at a banquet with the captor's family. So you could assimilate some of the spirit as you went forward.
Eat their heart.
Out, in fact.
Eat them out, in fact.
Depending upon your feelings, I guess.
That's one way to go. It's a little death, if you will.
Easy. Someone has watched The Last Duel recently. Okay. Today, most countries that use the death penalty as part of their criminal justice systems offer some form of a last meal. Along with the U.S., of course, Japan and South Korea are the only industrialized democracies among the 58 countries in the world that employ capital punishment. And in Japan, the condemned don't know when they'll be executed until that day arrives.
Oh, God. Really?
Wow.
Yes.
Oh.
See, you're making a sad face. I don't know if that's bad. I think I'd be okay with that because
blissful
you don't
ignorance.
you don't have, I mean, right now, if you know it's coming, then you have, it just sinks in. You have that dread.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that it's, granted the dates are calendared here in the U.S., but I feel like the sword of Damocles is still hanging over your head. Like, you're going out.
Every day.
So you're just kind of waiting for
today the day?
So I feel like having some degree of certainty for me would probably be a little better. We're like, okay, at least I have some time, and not like, all right, today's the day. Or as Dexter Morgan would say, tonight's the night. I'm kind of, I have that same feeling Michael did there.
No, see, so I understand where you're coming from, and I think I agree initially, assuming that assuming that you make it past a few weeks in Japan, then I think eventually you'd be like, okay, it's not today. And you would just get into the routine of you wake up and you're like, oh my, like, because the first couple weeks you would have that
where
like, you'd be like
fatigue.
Yeah, because then you just be like, oh, okay, like, and then that dread just shakes off after a couple weeks because you realize, well, you know, it's not going to be today, and then you just kind of get into the swing of things until it suddenly is. Whereas here in the States, you would know definitively it's happening this day. So that dread would be with you every single day because you wouldn't get into that blissful ignorance.
Well, but I think, like, also we're not taking into account the judicial system and the very slow moving wheels of that, you know, where it's going to take you years in most instances, and also going through the appellate process and all the other things. So it's not necessarily just going to be like you're in for a week and then you're out. So you kind of have the same chance if it's to acclimate.
Well, yes, but you still have that. Once a date is set, then you know that that date is coming.
But
whereas assuming that there's still slow-moving wheels in Japan to a certain degree, then at least you not only have that longevity there, but you have the ability then to just kind of acclimate to it.
So you just want to be a cow in the chute, just, you know, strolling your way with all your friends?
Truthfully, I think so. I actually think I prefer that. Like, just like, you know, we all live, you know, comfortably not knowing when our number is up, right? Whereas if you knew definitively May 7th, 2023 was your last day on this earth, you would be viewing today significantly different than you do right this moment.
Well, but there's also a seed of hope, I imagine, that can flourish at any time. You're saying, like, maybe that, you know, last hour, you know, governor's pardon is going to come down. Like, I might finally be saved. I don't imagine you could ever just completely exhaust the idea of hope for those who are legitimately hopeful.
Oh,
That's why we have innocence projects.
Japan. But you'd have that same hope, like, of like.
I don't want to presuppose the Japanese sentiment either here, because it's a very different country. So who knows?
No, but hope springs eternal.
You'd hope.
Zing!
But no, it's an interesting thought process. But at the same time, I have a feeling, like, particularly like with the Innocence Project or things like that, like, we're not even taking into account people who are falsely accused or have, you know, undergone other things. Like, that must be an even stranger red light to race to. But in any event, jumping back onto the concept of the Japanese, frequently the individuals are only notified as they are en route to their execution, which would, of course, then make the need for a last meal somewhat superfluous. So,
once you get an idea, once you're leaving your cell or whatever, or
I mean,
do they
again,
often take trips?
It depends. Who knows? I mean, it's you would imagine isolation is necessary, but I haven't studied the Japanese
it would be
prison
humorous
system.
It would be humorous if they, like, regularly take you to see, like, cherry blossoms and parks and all this.
Or cherry poppin' daddies. And...
Yeah, exactly. You're going to concerts, everything's good, and then one day it's just like, hey, this isn't the way to the park.
You're like, oh, I'm going for a walk. Today's my walk. Right now's my walk. Wait, I'm going to the vet? Oh, no.
Oh, no.
To tsunami, gentlemen. To tsunami.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
You're
anyway,
fine.
continue. Moving on.
So, as of June 2020, governing bodies in the U.S. and its colonial predecessors had executed some 15,825 men and women since the first permanent European settlements were established. The majority of them, it seems, did not get a special last meal. The Newgate prison parties didn't make the crossing with William Bradford and John Carver aboard the Mayflower. There's, of course, no record of a last meal for George Kendall, believed to be the first Englishman executed in the New World, who was accused of spying for Spain and shot in Jamestown in 1608. Of course, the nature of the criminal justice around that time was such that Kendall would also have been shot or hanged, beheaded, or burned at the stake for stealing grapes, just to give you a bit of perspective there.
That's why I have to say is 15,000. I know number lies, yada, yada, but
not
like,
a lie.
is
Nope.
really only 15,000?
Mm-hmm.
That is bizarre. I honestly thought it would be a lot more than that.
Now, I think we're also not taking into account that there was a certain degree of time where folks were very apt to take the law into their own hands. We do have an episode in the logs here about frontier justice for that exact reason. So I'm sure that a lot of that isn't factored in, or there were certainly plenty of folks that were willing to take retribution without forestalling a trial in general. So take a lot of these things into account account that we were a little
True.
less organized, and there were certainly, while there was a degree of civility taking place in larger cities, I'm sure that sometimes it was just the Harlan Sanders way of, let me meet you outside at that glorious billboard with my shotgun, and we'll see whether or not you're willing to continue about the process here. But
True. No, good point.
So who knows? But that is the number that we were given here.
Mm-hmm.
So one Scott Christensen, who has written extensively on the history of American prison culture, believes the standardized last meal probably emerged around the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th, with the rise of a modern administrative state. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting, and there was a lot of material I cut out of this, just because it explains in excruciating detail, so again, check this article out, it's fantastic. But messy and raucous public executions fell out of favor with the more refined sensibilities of the upper and middle classes, and the idea of man's abilities for moral improvement fueled opposition to the death penalty. Rehabilitation, rather than simply deterrence and retribution, became an important aim of criminal sanction. At the time, though, there was still a strong fear of social disorder, and so the assertive state governments were eager to find better ways to keep the peace in a fledgling nation whose cities were growing, industrializing, and diversifying. The answer, or so it seemed, was to replace the more communal sanctions of the colony and early republic era, fines, banishment, floggings, labor, with long-term incarceration in state-run penitentiaries. Criminals would be isolated from society and purged of their deviant impulses. When you run out of sending them to the colonies have to have subsequent colonies, and there we are. Executions, which had, of course, long been believed to have been have a scared straight effect on the public, were now thought to inspire the very violence they were intended to deter. And particularly, it also kind of helps to escalate where, if I'm committing a crime that might be worthy of death, why not just, run the full gambit here and see if I can get out of here?
In for a penny, in for a pound.
Exactly. And thus, they began to move executions to yards inside of the prisons, where the witnesses were only a select few, usually prominent officials and merchants. So, in an effort to aid in both their efficiency and decorum, Christensen writes, another new aspect of this choreographed ritual of death entailed the release of detailed reports to the public that described, amongst other things, precisely what the condemned had requested as his or her last meal. This then gave the impression of a humane and dispassionate custodial government authority, but it also, intentionally or not, tapped into a bit of the old public fascination with executions, when a family might hop on the wagon, ride into town square with a picnic basket in tow, and watch someone to be launched into eternity.
Let me interject and ask either one of you two there. If public executions were still a thing, and you had the ability to attend, would you?
No.
I do not savor that sense of community that other people do, so I'm an isolationist by trade. I would, I'm not necessarily saying I abhor the idea of watching someone launched into eternity, as they said, but I don't want to be around crowds, certainly. So if they televised it, then, maybe.
See, the revolution will be televised.
Indeed.
So Shane's answer is genuine in terms of, I don't like crowds. I don't want to be around crowds, so I wouldn't go in. I'm like, okay, I can understand that.
And the smell, if it was like a mass exodus as well, no thank you.
Michael, your disdain with the no, as if it would be absurd to entertain such an idea, doesn't strike as fully genuine. Or at the very least, the disdain is interesting because then I wonder why the disdain. Because, okay, not liking crowds, I can respect that. I'm not a big fan of crowds either, but I do think I would probably go, which means your disdainful look as like, what kind of person would say yes?
Well, I'm going to go back to saying that here is Doc being critical yet again.
I think the opposite. I thought I think he was being critical of me because That's what I'm saying is the disdain of the thing of like.
Methinks you doth protest too much, my friend.
Agreed.
I don't slow down at traffic accidents or look to see people's mauled bodies either. It's just I do have a noted disdain for people who can. It's like, if you want to watch this, there's far more grotesque things that you can find. And actually, having been in the presence of a dead body in the course of my life, not that interesting.
No, that's true.
And the smell's not great.
No, that's fair. I wouldn't want to see the dead body, but I think I would go to a public execution just for the sheer novelty of it. I don't think it'd be something that like a regular occurrence.
Okay, and the vindictive glee, naturally.
Well, if the person was somebody I personally knew, then hell yeah, let's see him go. But if it was just some stranger and it was a public gallows type thing, I think I'd probably go just for the novelty aspect of it, just to see, if there's any, I don't know, moment where you see the
the intestines slide out of the hole.
The light leave the person's eyes or something like that. Just to see if you ascertain any meaning to life in that moment.
So we've joked about you wanting to kill people, and I think that we were hitting a little too close to home with the nail here. But Michael,
I knew as soon as I said
yourself.
There are websites called things like Live Leak where you can watch that stuff in real time if you're really, really interested in seeing the light leave someone's eyes.
And snuff films, as Nicolas Cage's oeuvre has taught us.
It's very much, I would take it more, because I'm talking about it being more the experience of do you ascertain anything in the moment, right? And I think that very much like a concert, or a theater experience, I think this would have to be like a shared experience with others. I don't want to watch something on a screen because I don't think that you get that meaning to life that could potentially be there in those last moments.
I was like, we're Americans. It's going to be like the WWE if they do this. There's going to be 12 camera angles. You'll never get close.
Joe Rogan going oh, look at his head roll as his head flew off of the guillotine. Oh! And then you're going to look at your neighbor and you'll be like, oh man, did you see how fast that head flew? Oh man, did you see the blood splatter? They should have said the first four rows were wet zones.
I'm going to be standing.
Oh, that's fair.
This just makes me flash on Doc and I having the Departed moment where he's Jack Nicholson, turns to me, he's like, huh, she fell funny.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I guess I appreciate your sense of empathy, Michael, with the clear no, I wouldn't do that. I think that there's probably just something a little a switch that's not turned on in my brain, because something before when we talked about cannibalism and would you eat a burger of human meat, right? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, I would. I think very similar to that. It's most people's answer would be no, thank you. And I'm I'd try it.
I think as we alluded to in the beginning of the show and also things we've talked about, it's all sensory experience, right? And if you do believe that this is the shot that you get if you're not into reincarnation or you don't have an idea of eternity or things like that, this experience is all that you have, and then you loaf into the loam again. So obviously, yeah, it's one of those if I am so titillated by the concept of death and that dark alleyway at the end of life, you want to go and see if you can get a peek through the door, right? That's part of why public executions were a thing, why people were so invested in the prospect. It wasn't necessarily just, the gore or the shock. It's, what happens when someone dies? Can you see, is there a weight of the soul? Do you see when the spirit is flown? Do flocks of birds wing you to your rest? We've heard enough stories. Obviously, you want to have some sort of corroboration there. And so it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. Tragedy does thrill us in a voyeuristic sense. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily just completely far afield. Yeah. But it's a little maudlin, admittedly. But I'm not shocked that Michael doesn't want to, from both a scientific perspective, but also he's very detached from most human emotions I've found. So I don't think that's too shocking.
Yes, but to your point, Doc, there was a reason why public executions were so popular, They were a good social event. Now, would I see on the calendar that there's a public education?
Education.
Education.
I love that move. It's not one of Edge's better known finishers, but I was very fond of finishers. Yes,
he definitely knew how to kneel that finisher. But
yes,
if it was
the concerto is one of the most populars, but I was always I was very fond of the spear myself.
Yeah, exactly. If public executions were always on a Sunday afternoon, it's like, well, I got nothing else better to do. Might as well, meet up with the Joneses and chat.
It's a day of rest. What else are you going to do?
Yeah, you rest and relax and watch someone die.
Crack a beer and watch the game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in that case, yeah, there's that social aspect, that comes with it. That is understandable. Now it would be weird if you're you go there, front row seats every time, you're standing there seeing everything, you got the poncho on, you're ready to get splashed. When you brought up
the WWE, it genuinely made me think I am actually somewhat surprised that here in America we haven't done something similar to that. Bring back the old gladiator system where we dangle that carrot of 6 men enter and last person gets commuted to a life sentence.
I mean, there is a portion of this that is UFC is absolutely emblematic of that. I mean, there's a portion where everybody is there hoping something happens. That's why a knockout gets that bloodthirsty sort of response from a crowd. The other fascinating aspect of this, as we're thinking, there was a George Carlin bit about saying that we are so fascinated by this, we ought to take into account now. This is a hashtag triggered moment here for anybody, but talking about self-harm, he said he should have America should have an all suicide channel. People are going to do it anyways, might as well just make a little money and then you can have game shows. It's I killed myself and all I got was this goddamn t-shirt. So there's a lot of ridiculous nonsense, but we are that voyeuristic sort of, lynched people that just have to get some sort of entertainment from everything. Reality television walks dangerously close to that line.
Oh yeah.
So it's not shocking. I think we might get to the Running Man at some point. You never know.
Well, and what's fascinating is you could pitch it to both, right? Because you could sell it to the ultra conservative folks that are also big into pro guns and
bloodthirsty.
UFC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, bloodthirsty. But you could also pitch it to the liberals as well, all 6 of these men are scheduled to die, but in this scenario, one gets to live at least. So to a certain degree, at least one is still living, and so it's better than the alternative.
So you're saying Stephen King had a really good idea again?
I think so.
Yep. Very little known fact, I find, because not a lot of people know that The Running Man was his short story before the famed Schwarzenegger adaptation. It's an interesting story.
Just add it to the massive list of this great movie. Yeah, it was a short story by Stephen King. Again, another one.
Another one. This sidebar because we're just having 18 of these, but. As I'm nearing the end of the list, I saw somebody who went through on YouTube and ranked all of the Stephen King books, in order. And my take was almost diametrically opposed to this person. They had The Talisman as number 6. And I was
they did. I was waiting for you to say, yeah, Talisman ranked really highly.
I was like, you tone deaf motherfucker. So I at some point, whether it's a Disinformed thing or not, because I saw how popular it was when I listed my favorite films, I might wind up just doing a Stephen King list just for my own edification, just to force myself to have to rank them for my own personal opinions. But yeah.
Well, it's the beauty of art, though. It can appeal to so many different people in so many different ways.
But it's also, you constantly hear people as, what's your favorite book? Or what's the one that you recommend I read? And I feel it's an easy, way to kind of give a running rank of, yeah, okay, this one was in the top, 10, or it was in the top 30 out of the 80 that were there, then it's probably a good bet that if I feel the way Shane does. Now, I'm not recommending this to you at all, Doc, because we've proven my taste and yours are not in any way similar.
Oh, but, our tastes are quite aligned, thank you kindly.
As long as it's not a war film, apparently. But, all right.
I said that was a good movie.
I mean, it was rather simplistic and made it basically a lunchbox version of it. Easy. Don't eat your microphone. You're fine. Calm down.
I will deep throat my microphone in real time to make a point, damn it.
Turned into a South Park character for a second there, but okay. So, back to the idea of if you share what the last meal was had for the prisoner with the press and the general public, that it will seem a little more humane as an act of the state. The press, it was subsequently stated, ate this concept up. This was the dawning of the penny press at the time, when steam-driven printing presses spurred the development of a mass media in America. And thus, as executions began to vanish inside the penitentiaries, the newspapers discovered the public was still eager for accounts of the proceedings. As we have just alluded to, everybody is a little bloodthirsty. So, in 1835, for instance, readers of the New York's Sun and Herald newspapers learned that Manuel Fernandez, among the first men at Bellevue prison to be privately executed, enjoyed cigars and brandy on his last day, compliments of the warden. How very un-Shawshank of them. But, so, nearly 200 years later, America is in the grips of a revolution in communication technology, even more pervasive than the penny press. The death penalty was, of course, resurrected in 1976 after a 10-year-long nationwide moratorium, and public interest in last meals was rekindled, along with the debate over capital punishment. We are not going to sit and wring our hands in laurel eyes about that. The opinions of this show do not necessarily need to go and, sort of deviate on that path presently, because I'm not going to hector anybody at the moment, but initially, due to the rapidly merging news and entertainment industries, and eventually to the internet and a 24-hour news cycle, the debate was, of course, amplified and then widened. The last meal, then, is an oddly symbolic and life-affirming ritual in the vigorously dehumanized environment of modern-day death row prisoners. In that sense, it's hard to see the modern last meal in America as actually being about anything. It's not necessarily symbolic about having a better relationship with the state. It's not necessarily venerating the life of the individual so much, and though they might try to cloy it as being that. But over the latter half of the 20th century, with the notion of deterrence unproven, and, as we learned, the promise of rehabilitation now being mostly forgotten and seeded into the archives, retribution and general incapacitation became the primary goals of the American criminal justice system. Individual responsibility, and I'm throwing that into quotes here as the article did, became the defining doctrine for everything from America's economic life to its crime-fighting strategies. And thus, in the 19th century, however, there were still concerns that executions carried out in private would foster doubts that justice was actually being done by the court system. We don't get to see this person dispatched. They're just thrown into a nameless cell, and they could be living the high life out in the Rio. Who knows?
Like Bin Laden.
Indeed. And so, when the convict was, sort of paraded out in front of public, that helped in the mind of the general public, as presumed by the state, to sort of prove that they were indeed an irredeemable monster, and we've exhausted all of our other options, and this is the only, final nail in the coffin, as it were. This is the only resort that we have left to us. And thus, in an effort to reclaim control of the narrative of capital punishment and sort of capitalize on this fervor a little bit, the authorities saw the benefit of the new mass circulation newspapers to feed the public information about the executions. The press accounts made it seem that the public still had some form of informal oversight over the killing that was being done in its name. The state, after all, had to distinguish the violence of its punishment from the violence of the individual that it is punishing, and then by allowing the last meal as a final statement from the prisoner, a level of dignity and compassion were extended to the condemned that the individual themselves did not show to their victims.
Did your research happen to indicate how long between execution and last meal there typically is? Is it something like you finish the meal and then get up and there you go? Or
again, this is going to vary from province to province, if you will, state to state, and particularly in the U.S., as we've learned, this varies wildly. There are, if you can still, kill someone by firing squad if that is deemed appropriate. I'll get into some of the nuances of how these things are regulated in certain states and just give a couple examples, but I didn't go into too much in the way of being extensive about the individual nuances between. In some instances, I imagine it's probably going to be the night before in most places, but it might be different occasionally. Who knows? Someone who researched, that's who. But in any event, so the fact that the taxpayers are, of course, picking up the tab for these sometimes gluttonous requests only bolsters the public's righteous indignation in some instances. But the final turn of the screw in some respects is that prisoners often don't actually get what they ask for their last meal. Regulations often preclude some of the more exorbitant orders, as we were talking about earlier, as it is a request and not what is actually served, let alone what's actually consumed, which is often little or nothing, that is released to the press and then subsequently broadcast to the general public. And so most states actually have restrictions on what can be served and how much of it, a monetary limit, for instance, or based on what's in the prison pantry on a given day. So some folks will actually not outsource material either. There's a lot of discussion about folks ordering, for instance, like Kentucky Fried Chicken or grabbing other materials. There was a lot of commentary about the indications of sort of socioeconomic status here, because some people were asking for food that they were familiar with that was a comfort to them. Your sort of, fried chicken or things like that, which again made a bit of a statement that I wasn't entirely comfortable with throwing out on my own. But then saying that there are some things that were seen as sort of the trappings of entitlement or the upper echelons, like getting lobster or getting steak or having extravagant meals that somewhat help you to transcend a little bit and experience something nicer before you shuffle loose the mortal coil. That was kind of an interesting aspect there as well.
Does the last meal include the ability to have alcohol?
I wouldn't imagine that is the case, and I will tell you why as we move forward, but I'm not sure whether I included this or not, so I'll indicate it here and skip over it later. In most instances, they say they actually don't allow them to listen to music before they go to the chair, because that has the potential to cause them to become emotional or erratic. And I imagine alcohol would probably be precluded as well, because one, I don't think they allow alcohol in prisons, generally speaking. It's not a good idea with a, surplus population like that. Particularly when you want to maintain some order of stricture or, restriction for people. So, yeah, I wouldn't imagine that they're allowing folks to have alcohol.
That's fair. I was just curious if, a glass of wine with your steak and baked potato or something to that effect.
Yeah,
right?
You would assume within reason that would be something. But again, this is a prison. They're not trying to be overly indulgent. But and again, talking about sometimes it's like, okay, well, this is what we have on hand. So of the things that are at your availability, here's what you have. Funnily enough, as I was looking through these things, in Arizona, the state procedures on execution state that an inmate can request a last meal by completing a form.
Sounds about right.
That's a really fantastic Paul Simon song talking about going into heaven, and in order to do anything, you have to fill out a form first and then wait in the line.
Sign it in triplicate.
Yes. So so if you complete the form and return it no later than 14 days prior to the execution for the great state of Arizona, their procedure then indicates that reasonable effort shall be made to accommodate the request. Reasonable, which means in Arizona you will then receive a ham sandwich, and we hope that you enjoy it with our best wishes.
Yes,
it's like individuals who were doing Robin Williams had a joke, which again someone will say he stole from somebody else, I'm sure, that they would give you like an alcohol swab before they gave you the lethal injection. It's like, the fuck is the point of that? I don't want you to get that last minute infection. And in Florida, last meals are limited to a budget of $40, and all materials must be purchased locally.
Which sucks more and more as inflation goes up. And I wonder how long has it been since that $40 was adjusted? Because $40 in 92 versus $40 in 23, very different.
Well, I can get an awful lot of Taco Bell for $40.
Well, you can
Still.
get 40 items. Or, well, I guess if they include the tax and stuff, then you could probably get
Ooh.
34, 35.
Well, do I need that much, really?
Well, no, I'm on board with you,
Yes.
though. No, truth be told, I'm on board
Well,
with you. I think
no,
if
it's
I'm not
just
allowed...
funny.
Because he was the one that was all about, like leaving a brown mile when you're walking the green mile. So yeah, he'll be like, yeah, eat 35 items worth of Taco Bell, like leave your mark.
Well, no, so yes, fair enough. The classic Taco Bell bit there. I was actually thinking if I could not have alcohol, right? So if I can't have that kind of fancy indulging meal of like wine and steak and all that jazz, then I think if for my last meal, I probably would want something exceptionally like heavy or greasy, right? Like, a couple Pizza Hut pizzas or Taco Bell or something like that. And then I think I would try to just stay up all night so that by the time, so I would just feel like super tired and exhausted and heavy and bloated, so that as I'm being led to the chamber, it's like all I want to do is sleep anyways and pass out. So death would come as a sweet release.
Man, your mental state is terrifying to me. I don't know if you see a therapist, but I'd recommend it.
If I eat enough Domino's pizzas and I stay up the next day, I'll be wanting that chair.
I just want to
Let
be
me go to sleep.
miserable and bloated, gassy and uncomfortable, so that the sweet release of death is precisely that. The welcoming arms of Morpheus will drag me into the abyss, and I can just puke all of this pizza right up onto the floor, and then they'll have to drag my soggy ass down the hallway, just covered in slop.
Well, no, truth be told, if you ate, like if I ate like 3 large pizzas, I would enjoy the first bit of the meal. And then as Louis C.K. once said, the meal's not over when I'm full, the meal's over when I hate myself, right? Mm-hmm. So I would, plow through all of that. So I would have had still a good meal, but then it would also be like, oh my God, I hate myself. Like I'm done. Or like I hate this. And then if you just stay up all night, then, you're not so much thinking about, oh my gosh, this is about to happen at 8:00 in the morning, or like the death aspect of it. You're just tired. You want to pass out. You're like, I don't care. Whatever. Let's just, just whatever.
It just makes me think of like you as Dallas at the end of Alien in the director's cut, mind you, where you're like plastered into the wall. You vomited all of this pizza all over yourself, and you're just like laying there covering your mouth like, kill me. Eyes are shut because you just got pressed so tight that things are just gooping together.
Better that than stress, than stressing the whole night. And
I would stress if I got to tell you, as somebody who often has like indigestion and has to burp constantly or all these other things with trapped air, I would death more than discomfort. I get it, but I'd rather be comfortable going into my demise, or I was like, I don't want to spend the last few hours I have of this life miserable,
yeah,
even more than I already would be, because I got nervous for the first day of school, for fuck's sake, like perpetually the first day of any new venture. Death is the big adventure. So
well, that's my point. So instead of spending that evening wallowing in like existential dread and wondering about what comes next and stuff, wouldn't you rather be going, oh my God, I can't believe I ate so much?
No,
I feel
because then I would have existential dread and diarrhea. I don't think that those two things are good bedfellows, friend, but that's me.
I just want something to distract me from what's coming, and to be at the point where I welcome the sweet release.
Okay, so you are into BDSM from the discussion here, I imagine. I just want to be distracted from what's coming. I just want to be, bound up in leather, whipped with a cat o' nine tails, and had hot wax drip down my butt cheeks. I don't want to enjoy this. I just want to be miserable until it's over.
You're not wrong.
Okay, all right. Whistles, whips, yo-yos.
He admit it.
Okay, we have gone so far off the rails compared to what I thought. All this for $40.
Feed me more.
$40 and floor. Please never use a Ryback catchphrase on this show. Come on. Ooh, the ultimate warrior of the late aughts. So, as I was alluding to, part of the injustice of even if you make a request for a last meal, they don't necessarily fulfill that request, at least not the way you'd expect. So if you were expecting filet mignon and lobster tail, as Saddam Hussein did not ask for, well, it's likely to end up being chopped meat and fish sticks, or fish sticks and custard. Either way, fish fingers, I should say. And according to Brian Price, who was an inmate who cooked final meals for other prisoners in the great state of Texas, Doc, for over a decade before he was paroled in 2003. This is something that happened frequently. In 2001, a book called Last Supper's Famous Final Meals from Death Row includes this teaser. How's this for a last meal? 24 tacos, 2 cheeseburgers, 2 whole onions, 5 jalapeno peppers, 6 enchiladas, 6 tostadas, 1 quart of milk, and 1 chocolate milkshake? That's what David Castillo, convicted murderer, packed in the night before Texas shot him up with a lethal injection. So it sounds to me as though someone else shared your particular perspective on going to the great beyond there, Doc.
Yeah, I was on board with that meal, with the exception of the milk and the onions. If
That's
they came,
a lot of milk.
If the onions came cut up, sure, but if you got to pop them like an apple, that's a little weird.
You gotta take some of the edge off the jalapenos, apparently, and with that much cheese, you're gonna have a problem. But then adding the milk into the mix, like, ugh.
Well, I was also surprised by the jalapenos versus like jalapeno poppers. Like, wrap it up in bacon, throw some cream cheese in that, then we're talking. But like, just
jalapeno poppers with Mexican food might be a little bit weird.
That's literally what I had for dinner tonight.
You strange man.
And you have my pity.
Not even joking.
Sad, strange little man.
How dare you? How dare you, little?
To infinity and beyond.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you. Anyway, okay, so this is going to be an off tangent, but I just have to ask because now we're talking about gumming up the works heavy with some dairy.
I mean,
are they allowed to lash shit?
Gumming up, but then as he was alluding to, if you're lactose intolerant and you're drinking that much, like maybe the brown mile is real. Yes.
Yeah, but are they allowed to lash shit after the last?
Oh well, I'm sure they have the toilet in the cell.
Furthermore, it's like, what are they gonna say? No. Like, hey,
yeah.
I'm fit to burst here. I'm prairie dogging it. Like, give me 5-second reprieve before we go down the hall.
And they'll be like, no, you're going to be dead in 5 minutes anyway. Just hold it.
Like, well, then the question becomes, how much of this do you want to clean up? And,
I mean,
if it was Doc, he wouldn't say anything and just, wait to unload later.
He's all sitting.
I feel like
I've got a surprise for you.
It's been percolating all week.
Doc's death protocols basically follow his 2 favorite Metallica albums. It would be load and reload.
That's right, because you got to kill them all.
Thank you.
I want them to be thinking about that night. My execution for the next 72 seasons.
Yeah, you want it to be creeping death, I see. Well done. It's like you're trapped under ice. So, back to the list we were previously given. What Castillo, who was executed in 1998 for stabbing a liquor store clerk to death, actually got for his last meal was simply 4 hard-shell tacos, 6 enchiladas, 2 tostadas, 2 onions, 5 jalapenos, 1 quart of milk, a chocolate milkshake, and a partridge in a pear tree.
He actually did pretty good, though. I mean, that's a pretty good effort on their part.
A very hefty spread, not exactly up to what he ordered. So, as what they're saying is, you can put in an exorbitant request, not necessarily going to get it. But, of course, this keeps us in line. I'm sorry not to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I was just remembering the question. Did you answer? Did we know, like, when that $40, for instance, was set? Like,
oh, that was Florida. He's talking about Texas.
But also, I didn't get into that degree of nuance. Yeah. I looked at several articles, but again,
he's not me.
I would have had to spend a lot more time looking at legal statutes because, again, there is surprisingly not a plethora of material about this. Strangely enough. There's a lot of, again, like self-published sites and, your standard operating fare that way, but they don't get into those nuances.
Well, no, I was only curious because, like I said, let's say that $40 was set in 1990 or whatever. Then they're actually envisioning, like, a pretty decent meal for the last meal, right? But very similar to, like, the minimum wage, right? When it first came in, you could theoretically like support yourself and have a living and stuff like that. But nowadays, of course, $7.25 is absurd, right? Same deal. If that $40 was set in 1965, that's a quite exorbitant meal, right? So they're envisioning like, you know, a quite an empathetic send-off versus $40 in 2023 is, you know, maybe dinner at Denny's.
Well, now let's take into account, though, if you look at the current state of the prison system, particularly because we also now have private prisons. And as you learn, like in West Virginia, there are several lawsuits pending for individuals who are being essentially starved to death because they don't have enough food on hand to even keep everybody effectively fed. Half of that stuff is spoiled. Like, so, I mean, it's not as though everybody's creature comforts and wishes and desires are really being taken into account in a lot of these instances. So it isn't shocking to me or completely out of line that they're like, oh, by the way, we don't give a damn what you actually want for your last meal. It's like, be glad you're getting anything at all. So I think somebody, particularly from a governmental standpoint, being asked this question is probably going to look at that and go like, that $40 is fine. Go ahead. So I'm not sure how much legislation is actually being sent. I mean, veterans can't even get decent health care at this point. So it's like, if we're talking about the degree of granularity we get into looking at some of these things, and as we'll discover here, that $40 might not even be in discussion because it did come to pass yet again in Texas due to requests like the prior one. The state did stop offering special last meals as Lawrence Russell Brewer, the name that shall live on in infamy, famously ordered 2 chicken fried steaks, 1 pound of barbecued meat, a triple patty bacon cheeseburger, a meat lover's pizza, 3 fajitas, an omelet, a bowl of okra, which would make my wife delighted, 1 pint of Bluebell ice cream. So he was apparently going for a better call Saul here. Some peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, because we're not savages, and 3 root beers in total, and didn't eat a single mouthful of it. So, this, of course, prompted an outraged state senator to threaten to outlaw the last meal entirely if the Department of Corrections didn't end the practice outright. And perhaps this is a bellwether for the total elimination of the practice across the board for the United States, because as we've proven, we're not exactly, you know, wringing our hands and talking about the critical conditions that a lot of prisoners are under these days. It's not as though our prisons are overpopulated or struggling for adequate funding across the board anyway, obviously, since we've privatized a lot of this. Yeah. So in any event, not to, you know, ring the bell a little too hard on the way out here, but it seems like this might be a bit more of an antiquated practice than anything going forward.
Well, it's going to be needed more and more, too, not with the, you only need 8 out of 12 jurors in Florida there for the death sentence now. So I'm sure that there's going to be more last meals being requested in the not too distant future.
And they won't have any cookbooks in order to prepare materials from. And so, you know, we've outlawed everything else.
Oh, man.
Don't want to have any rise and shine woke eggs, you know, roused anywhere. But so to throw all of this discussion of last meals into context here, I think we might bear a little discussion on an After Dark to see what a concept for a last meal for the 3 of us might be. An interesting concept. Oh, here we go. Michael, I'm not going to require you to have to be able to shit on command once you've had it. Unlike Doc here, who's going to prepare to be like a human
I'm going to need some coffee with that
launcher.
Last meal.
Yeah.
He's already percolating now, just in preparation.
But
for the record, I was asking just in general, not for myself. That's not something I would go for. I'm not looking to...
He's just asking for a friend, he swears.
Yep, it's an episode of Jackass just willing to manifest itself here. But so, in summation here, as the common credo of Weight Watchers indicates, eat to live, don't live to eat. And I disagree with that patently, but...
That is not a creed of Weight Watchers, is it?
It is, in fact.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
WW.
Why not?
No, they don't go by Weight Watchers anymore. Now they're just WW.
And Dunkin' Donuts is no longer Dunkin' Donuts either. But
just
you know,
give them the DD.
I'm a slave to appearances, obviously. So Some of these things do fall out of fashion, however, when life is no longer part of the equation. So just something to ruminate on. But regardless, the concept of the last dance with Mary Jane, or more appropriately, Betty Crocker, Little Debbie, or Marie Callender, before your demise will still fuel dinner party patter from here to eternity, while gluttons like myself have any say in the matter. So, we will continue the conversation anon, if we'd like, including that airplane that's making a low buzz over somebody's home here. But
That's me, sorry.
You're fine. I do so enjoy keeping all of that in, including your typing and, the pigs being slaughtered in the background. Or, I'm sorry, the cherry popping, that is. So, that is the end of my presentation here. Do we have any additional questions or discussion for the lies before we proceed?
Let's see, that long list of meals. Was the 2 onions? Was that list actually
Nothing
all
about
legit?
that list was fake. I did not.
Okay.
I tried to actively avoid really
Listicles.
horrible, cheap nonsense, despite the filet mignon. I just thought offering chicken to a dictator seemed a little bizarre to me, but anyway.
Fair. I mean, but that even wasn't a list. It was just that. I got nothing.
You all did very well, considering.
Yeah.
I'm also a little out of practice with coming up with lies, and I, too, created this morning, so we're slamming some stuff together. But, okay. Lie number 1, of course, as we indicated, Saddam Hussein was offered chicken, but he refused to eat it, as opposed to filet mignon. Filet mignon, as you will.
Oh, okay.
The show that gives tracks and commentaries on the last meal requests of death row inmates is, of course, Dead Man Eating, as opposed to Diners, Drive-Ins, and Death Row. I was also going to name it what I have as my subject heading for this is To Dine or Die in Dixie. That was also my other thought for the run, but who knows. All right, moving on. Number 3 is a Tarantino reference, and I am not the least bit shocked that folks didn't run with it. But as opposed to the list of all the other things, the 3 pounds of fried sausages, 10 pounds of beef, 6 pounds of baked carp, the veal, soup, cabbage, bread, etc., and du strudel were not actually served in Frankfurt to Susanna Brandt. They just said a sweet was served. And I couldn't let that fly. That was just simply uncalled
fair.
for. But
so now I have to ask, what is that a reference to? Because I don't get it.
Okay, that's an Inglourious Bastards reference. So
okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Attendez la crème. So, in any event, it was that's a cheapie. I'm considering that cheap on my own, but I couldn't help but run. Now, another thing that Michael was sniffing at and called, but we did not actually get the lie. The shared aperitif, the having a drink with your executioner, is true. It is, however, called St. John's blessing, after John the Baptist, who is said to have forgiven those who beheaded him, as opposed to Joan of Arc, who very obviously was not happy to go to her death. And
That makes
True.
Yes.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yes, so it was not St. John's blessing, but I found that far too funny to offer a sacrament to a heretic before they went to death, and that the thought that she would even accept it was just laughable to me. So, but thankfully we focused more on the fact that you had to sit with your executioner and share a drink, as opposed to her being burnt alive. So, again, my gallows humor rearing its ugly head. That was lie number 4. The fact that
So come here often. Well, yes, I do.
Not anymore. So it is the little death after all. Speaking of those French. Anyway, Brandt, for lie number 5, did not just sit stolidly refusing to issue apologies and willfully flaunting their tradition. Apparently, it was just she was a nervous Nelly about the whole thing and didn't appreciate the ceremony, and so she was only able to just have the glass of water. It wasn't a strident stance on her part. It was just she just didn't drink anything. She didn't eat anything. I think the whole affair was awkward in general, as this was one of the progenitors of the movement, if not the first one out. So I'm sure everyone was uncomfortable and no one quite knew what to do with it. And eventually, they might have gotten into the swing of things, if you'll pardon the pun. But we'll see how that went. So,
surprised they didn't like hanging out.
It's a strange thing, you know. Everybody just heads will roll if you don't have a good time at these things. But line number 6, you did catch. It was not the Sumerian code of Hamus Hamush. It was instead the Sumerian code of Ur-Namu, which was no more or less nonsensical to me, but I decided to have the moons over my hammy represented here in some way, shape, or form.
Fair.
And finally, line number 7 is a bit of flair on my part. In saying that the Japanese individuals who are being sent to their death are not notified until they are en route to the execution, thus making the need for a last meal superfluous. All they had stated was simply that they don't know they're going to be executed until the day of, as opposed to throwing them in the chute and walking them down the hallway and going like, by the way.
Well, and I should have called that lie because I even commented
You did.
how it, I was like, how would that even be known? When they realize when they're leaving their cell, I should have been like,
Yep.
that must be bullshit.
And that's why I kept my mouth shut and let everybody have a
slick
bit of
Rick,
fun.
you
Well, you know, that's what
Yeah.
we're here for. So those were the 7 lies. Everything else contained is, as far as I am aware, factually accurate. So there you go. A little aperitif for us, if you will, as we slide our way towards episode 200. Our delightful, happy Death Day. I'm kidding. I keep giving Michael palpitations.
Oh, man.
I've had people send me messages like, are you really going to quit after 200? It's like, no, yes. But
maybe. Depends on the day.
I mean, we are prone to lying on this show. I have said that on many occasions. But so there you go, gentlemen. In spite of the fact that Michael thought he was just throwing me in the water today, I actually finally managed to throw together an episode. So there you be.
And a fantastic one it was.
Oh, bless you for saying so.
I concur. That was quite the meal.
Yes.
I had enough material to make it a 5-parter, but then I decided that I wouldn't subject you to such a gross and disgusting display, and so you got the one.
The Dildorado. Perfect.
Or
Yeah, I
joys
was
of
aware.
Christmas, or Alexander,
or Christmas,
or any
or
of the
Alexander.
other fucking,
That's fair.
string
you
of
got a valid
material.
point.
Yes. But in any event, that's what we got for this week. So, as I mentioned, I think we are going to have a brief conversation about what a possible last meal would be for everybody over on YouTube for the Disinformed After Dark, which of course is now supposed to be Fridays, so check in intermittently. We're not guaranteeing that's happening every week, but occasionally we'll keep stuff over there to keep you entertained, and maybe we'll
A little morsel, little last meal.
We might even talk about whether or not Michael believes in aliens. That might be how we wind up. As the light leaves his eyes. So maybe not. Okay. So.
Well, you just saw a publication.
I was just going to say, I finally got it. All right.
Well, now I don't need to go to any more. I saw it.
The execution. Yes. All right.
Yes.
So.
But I've tasted it and want more.
It's got the taste of blood. Run.
Dear Lord. Okay, so that is officially going to put the tag on the toe and the body in the bag for us this evening on this stirring installment of Disinformed. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard and had a good time with us, there are marvelous ways you can display that. I won't make Michael tell you anything, but you can, of course, like, subscribe, rate, and review. We would love to hear from you. We have new episodes of the show winging your way every lovely Monday morning, so be sure that you catch us there on your preferred podcast provider app. And, of course, over on the Tubes of You, stuff winging your way every fantastic Friday as well. So we will try to keep you as entertained as humanly possible. And maybe our antisocial networks might, get the occasional paddles to the chest from time to time. Who knows?
Ears open. Bring it back from the brink.
Such enthusiasm.
A stay of execution, if you will.
Yes. See how many pictures of grisly death we can put up on Instagram before they flag our account. Here's, Dead Bodies Through the Ages, brought to you by Dr. Michael. The bloodlust knows no bounds.
Ironically, I was like, actually, that doesn't sound like bad material.
Okay, so the Disinformed Instagram is now Happy Death Day. We will just have pictures of folks slipping the mortal coil, and
side by side with pictures of cheeseburgers or pies or various meals that they might have had at their last moment. I mean, who knows? I'm not these people.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so you're saying that we're going to be like kind of giving like almost like making it headcanon or something like that. Like, well, this person who died probably would have had this as their last meal.
Okay, so we'll have like Captain Jean-Luc Picard and Yeoman Snark for the dead or dying person in their last meal. So,
well, and we can start to talk about we could have pictures of Marilyn Monroe up there, and then just have whatever.
I'm not sure they pumped her stomach, friend, but all right, I'm letting this finally die, like the show and the bit should have. But in any event,
I've had 3 pizzas and I've stayed up all night. End me.
26 tacos, 34 enchiladas.
3 hamburgers, side fries, partridge in a pear tree,
and a quart of milk.
There were the individual who ordered all the other things. I think I'm not sure if I mentioned, but they ordered 2 gallons of milk for the individual who got all that stuff banned. Yeah, 2 gallons of milk to be brought in, and did not eat any of it.
Wild. I mean, just milk as a final parting. Ugh.
But again, I don't know what they actually allow them to have there. Hopefully, soft drinks or something is allowed these days. But in any event, speaking of bubbly refreshment and finally bringing things to an abrupt halt, that is going to officially wrap this up for this evening for us. Thank you all for being here as always, and we will see you very soon. So, for the Disinformed podcast this week, I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
And zippity zoop, we're out of here.
Go towards the light. It's so beautiful.